Kia ora, ko Louis Collins aho. Ngā mai ki te whare, welcome to the House. Changes to how the public service operates rarely make headlines. Most legislative reform in this area has a tendency to be dismissed as little more than a reshuffling of the bureaucratic furniture. But this week, the Governance and Administration Committee is taking submissions on the Public Service Amendment Bill, a piece of legislation that may sound dull, but actually introduces some significant and in some cases controversial changes. The bill falls under the government's broader push to refocus the public service on what it calls back to basics, a phrase that's become a recurring slogan underpinning law changes across several sectors. Arguably the most high-profile and politically charged change in the bill relates to DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, a concept increasingly debated in public discourse, especially in the United States. Here's what the Minister in charge, Judith Collins, had to say during the bill's first reading.
It removes specific provisions relating to diversity, equity and inclusion from the Act. Why? Because most of these objectives are substantially provided for explicitly and implicitly under other laws. The emphasis of the Act itself should be on an unbiased, merit-based appointment process.
As expected, most submissions on the bill have focused on that DEI provision. However, one submission this morning highlighted a clause in the bill that has largely flown under the radar. That submission came from Clerk of the House, David Wilson, who expressed concern about Clause 45, a section that proposes changes to the process around long-term insights briefings. Here's Wilson this morning.
The bill that's in front of the committee proposes that only the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet will prepare a long-term insight briefing in the future. And I raise that because it directly affects Parliament's ability to scrutinise the performance of the government and of public service departments. At the moment, there's one of these briefings per department. They're allocated to committees. As I said, almost all committees get one. So I guess the concern is that it reduces the ability of committees as a whole to carry out some of that long-term scrutiny and to scrutinise government performance. But on the other hand, I do take the point from the briefing papers and the regulatory impact statement on this around the need for better coordination and leadership of it by the DPMC. And so what I'm suggesting in the submission is that we try and preserve the parliamentary scrutiny by requiring an overarching report from DPMC, retain the obligation for departmental chief executives to prepare them for their own subject areas, but empower the DPMC to coordinate the process better.
Now, it's not unusual for the clerk to provide feedback on bills or select committee work, especially in regards to bills affecting Parliament. In fact, one of their two core roles, other than providing an administrative service, is to advise MPs on parliamentary procedure and legal matters. Still, in this morning's hearing, it appeared that National MP Tim Costley may not have fully understood or agreed with the clerk's role in this context.
It almost feels like you're making a policy recommendation in terms of how this could be run, and I've noticed that the Office of the Clerk has submitted on a few bills. At the same time, we're being told, in terms of this one particularly around scrutiny, as it's set out. At the same time, we're being told that committees can't be supported with more fulsome reports when they actually conduct scrutiny in terms of annual reviews and estimates because of time. And yet, I guess some of us sit here and go, well, the office has got time to make commentary on bills and policy recommendations. Yep. Could that not be dedicated to to helping actual scrutiny?
Okay, well, I guess there's two things to say about that. The Clerk of the House has always commented on bills that affect Parliament, and I think the amount of resource that takes is a pretty small fraction of the amount that's needed to support select committees. So it would be effectively the time that I and part of one staff member could give to support committee scrutiny. I think there is a balance to be achieved. I certainly would like to be able to provide greater support to committees, and I hope that with the passage of the Parliament Bill we'll be able to. But I think we'd be missing an opportunity if I didn't carry out my role in commenting on legislation that affects Parliament. All I'm highlighting is that a report that would come to each committee that actually focuses on those areas in their subject area will no longer be available. And I think there's a way of achieving what the government wants to, but also something that's still useful for Parliament.
So a bit more sort of spoon-fed?
Well, only to the extent that all advice to committees, if you sort of think of that as spoon-feeding, I suppose that that is a way of looking at it. But you're all busy people with a lot of things to deal with. I would have thought getting advice that was specific to it was more useful. But ultimately is a decision you'll have to make.
The Governance and Administration Committee will continue considering the Public Service Amendment Bill and is scheduled to report back to the House by December the 1st. I te whakarongo koe ki te whare. You've been listening to The House, a program made with funding from Parliament's Office of the Clerk. Matua.